Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today we did two chapters from the book of Job, chapters 23 and 24. And in these chapters, Job is responding to Eliphaz, who talked about last time. So if you want to know what he said, you can go back to the last video. But the important thing here that I want to kind of focus on is Job, on the surface, especially if you aren't tracking what he's been saying the whole time, seems to repeat a lot of the same arguments that he does before. And this is kind of true, right? He does, again, especially in 24, really harps on the wicked and how the wicked aren't punished. And it seems like the innocent suffer. And where is God's justice in these situations, right? We've seen Job bring up things like that before. So it seems like he's saying a lot of the same stuff. But if you pay really close attention, you actually see that this is a turning point for Job in this chapter, because we see Job take a different stance towards God's justice and the way that he is seeing how God acts in the world. So, for instance, one of the first times you see this is the way that Job begins this. So he starts by, again, using this courtroom imagery, right? I'm going to go plead my case. God is going to hear me, all that jazz, right? Well, the interesting thing here is Job says that God is going to hear me and he's going to vindicate me. He's going to agree with me. Now, Job has brought this up before. And so if you hear that, you might say, okay, well, yeah, Job, this is what he's been saying the whole time or whatever. But that actually isn't the case, because if you go back and you look at the previous times Job has brought up this argument, you actually see that he didn't believe that God would give him justice, that he would bring this to God and he would fall on deaf ears. That's back in chapter 9. So you actually see throughout this, one of the criticisms I've heard from people in the Bible study or things like that is it just feels like there's repetition this whole time, right? The interesting thing is, yeah, there is repetition, right? These arguments go back and forth between Job and his friends. I mean, this is what I believed for a long time too, until really this, when I started doing a deeper, in-depth study. But we actually see Job's opinion change over the course of the book. So as he's talking with his friends, he actually changes his mind a little bit in regards to some of their arguments, and also due to his own experience. And you see him begin to take a more nuanced view of God's justice and understanding. It doesn't mean that he understands what's going on. In fact, he admits that God is kind of unknowable in these two chapters. Not kind of, he is. But he also paints a much more compelling picture of God than his friend Eliphaz does. So if you go back and you see what Eliphaz says about God, right? He describes God as being above the world, veiled, not interacting with it other than to dispense justice and things like that. But you see Job paint a picture of a God who is omnipotent, right? Who's able to do anything, who's omniscient, he knows everything, and omnipresent, he's everywhere. And so you have a really powerful view of God from Job, and that allows him to mete out justice and care about human needs and concerns. And that's amazing, right? That's much better than having some dude that sits up highway that doesn't really focus that much on human affairs other than to dispense justice. The quandary is, though, for Job and for us, because that's the type of God we also believe in, is how do we reconcile suffering and justice, right? Well, Job, he eventually reaches, and this is in the 24th chapter, when he's talking about the wicked, and he's bringing up about how they do all of these bad things and the poor suffer for it, right? He ends up bringing this idea that, yes, God will bring justice, right? The wicked flourish for a time, but they are cut down. And I think that shows that he's changed a little bit on his mind, right? They're not always just prospering. But it also shows that, like, this isn't, well, from Job's perspective, this isn't the ideal, right? What would be good would be that the wicked are punished immediately. And I think that that's something that a lot of us agree with, right? We'd rather have something, if something bad happens to someone, or they do something evil, that the punishment comes swift and it comes immediately. But Job in this passage admits that that's not always within the mind of God or within God's plans, and Job doesn't know that those are the case. But he does end chapter 24 with a warning to his friends, because they've been bearing false witness against him. And he says, if I am right, though, if you can't contend with what I'm saying, then you need to be afraid. Essentially, he says this is a paraphrase with a little bit of interpretation of my own. Then you need to be afraid, because God is going to come after you, right? Because if God's justice is waiting on sin, then it's waiting on your guys' sin. He's going to come after you. So kind of starts with a little bit of ends with a little bit of a threat there. But I think that we see here that justice operates at God's will, right? Not in human temporal standards, but it operates by the will of God, and God will make things right. That's ultimately the point here. But Job is just not satisfied yet, or not satisfied with that completely, because he doesn't know what's been going on, right? Because if the truth remains that only the wicked are punished, then what is happening to him, right? So we'll get more into that next week. We're going to do 3 chapters next week, because chapter 25 is one of the longest chapters in the whole Bible. It's not. It's only six verses. So we're gonna do 3 next week. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you next Wednesday for our next Bible study recap. Peace out.